Hi, my name is Karen Lambert. I'd like to dedicate this to the doctor who told me 9 years ago that I had an irrational fear of diseases. He told me that nobody cared about me and that I should stop writing letters and stop fighting because the world does not care. I have chronic fatigue immune dysfunction syndrome and non-HIV AIDS, idiopathic CD lymphocytopenia. With these two diagnoses, I believe I am living proof that the AIDS-like CFIDS is transmissible, something that the medical establishment seems unable to admit or to acknowledge. I also believe I am living proof that CFIDS and non-HIV AIDS are basically the same immune disorder. 9 years ago, after a heterosexual sexual encounter, I became seriously ill with what looks like the natural disease progression of AIDS. After an acute infection and a period of asymptomatic health, albeit very short, I fell extremely ill to an unrelenting, progressively worsening AIDS-like demise. I can pinpoint exactly when I was infected with my chronic viral syndrome of unknown etiology. And because my acute infection stage was so distinguishable, I can also pinpoint when my undiagnosed pathogens left my body and infected yet another host. I am a link in a chain of sick people. Whatever I am currently dealing with, it strongly resembles classic textbook AIDS. But to add to my inquiry, I also clinically satisfy the CDC's criteria for a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome. Increasingly, I've become concerned that my systemic diagnosis is caught up in the treacherous politics of CFIDS, ME, and AIDS. Most people with CFIDS and ME do not like to talk about the many symptoms and immune abnormalities that they share with AIDS patients. I also suspect most ailing patients would rather be told that they have the very mysterious CFS than to be told that they have AIDS. I have a master's degree. I was a director at my firm. I used to be a triathlete. I have never used IV drugs. I had never traveled abroad. I can count my sexual partners on two hands. I fall into no risk groups. Statistically speaking, I know my undiagnosed infectious and communicable disease is not rare. So you tell me, if they're not in the miscellaneous CFS bucket, where are all these other immunosuppressed people? Anyone with CFS who does not consider the possibility that CFIDS or ME will eventually progress to a non-HIV AIDS diagnosis is very well trumping their own ability to diagnose the root cause of their illness. Why isn't CFIDS and ME a reportable disease overseen by our public health department? Why are ME and CFS, the same exact disorder, categorized as two separate illnesses on a worldwide level by ICD codes? Doesn't anyone else but me very clearly see the catastrophic cover-up going on? Why are we not reading about non-HIV AIDS cases and or the AIDS-like nature of CFS on the front pages of every newspaper in the world? And if CFS is non-HIV AIDS, then depending upon who you believe, there's anywhere between 500,000 and 28 million Americans out there with a transmissible illness. If that is what it is, our new form of AIDS dwarfs the original AIDS pandemic tenfold. Regardless of how politics may try to dissuade or delude you, all you need to know is that my idiopathic immune dysfunction is infectious. It is contagious and it is spreading. I'm not afraid to say that I have AIDS without HIV. I'm equally as unafraid of saying the most obvious thing about CFS. It sure does look like AIDS to me. If it takes courage to think and to say the things that I do, I hope there will be a miraculous outbreak of bravery from coast to coast and across the pond. If people believe that HIV causes AIDS and that CFIDS could be caused by a retrovirus, Why couldn't CFIDs be caused by an undiagnosed strain of HIV? That's where I started my plight 9 years ago when I started writing letters. And I haven't stopped. It's 9 years later, and I still write letters. And I would like to know why CFIDs and AIDS are not looked at together as one illness, if in fact it's believed that they are both caused by a retrovirus.
You have 1 minute.
Over the past 9 years, after opening my private foundation, I've gotten the White House to open an investigation. I got my Senator John Kerry to forward my case to the head of the CDC. I got the U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator to forward my case to the NIH, NIAID. Amongst other things, my blood has been to the CDC in Atlanta twice and to the Washington, D.C. pathology labs. I've sat on conference calls with the American Red Cross. And facilitated by the UN, I have been out of the USA twice now to meet with a Nobel scientist and his colleagues to provide blood samples. I've come to appreciate that what the doctor once told me 9 years ago, that nobody cares, is probably true. But my response to him is this, because his words still infuriate me. Just because the world does not care about me does not mean that I don't care about them. And I will continue to fight for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nancy.
Our next person for public testimony is Reverend Bernard Hillenbrand.
And unfortunately, I'm facing the choir. I was here at my birthday, and I was very old then, and I'm even older now. But I come to speak for several hundreds of thousands of people. They don't have AIDS, they don't have chronic fatigue syndrome, and they're not health caregivers, but they have people they love, and they are as much tormented by this disease and do as much suffering in their own way as if they actually had it. And I have been in that category now for 25 years. When my daughter, Laura Hillenbrand, and then her boyfriend and now her husband, Warden Flanagan, they're doing beautifully at school, 3.8 average, and they're athletes, and all of a sudden my daughter is very ill. She tries fighting it, and nothing is happening, and so she finally had to quit and come home. And then started this whole question. We took her to all the best hospitals, the best doctors. Someone would say, well, all she needs is more exercise. Or what's really the matter? Bernie, have you thought of taking your daughter to see a shrink? And those were the days when somebody cute thought it would be nice to call this yuppie flu. And then there were other people who suggested it was AIDS, and that I can remember the agony of my daughter trying to get a dentist because they were afraid of infection. We've come a long, long way since those days, but we seem to have lost some sort of enthusiasm. There's a great feeling now that everybody's doing things that's a little better, but we seem to have lost hope. My experience of dealing with people who have AIDS, who have chronic fatigue syndrome, they have a feeling that it's never going to change. That it won't get solved. let me say a couple of things in that regard. When I was very young, we had polio, and we started the March of Dimes. And 10 cents in those days would buy a loaf of bread or the movies on Saturday. And I can remember as a kid collecting those dimes, and that we had a president of the United States who was a living symbol. And we cared enough for him in all his presidency. We never one time photographed him in a wheelchair. But we conquered that disease. That was a triumph. A second experience, when I became a minister, I was assigned to Walter Reed as a chaplain. And Walter Reed is a triumph, isn't it? The victory over yellow fever. And all of the people in the United States military at that time were sent to Walter Reed, and I had my first 3 patients had AIDS, and one of them in particular I can remember. He was an energetic young kid and wanted to be a soldier, joined the Army, and of course AIDS is an immune disease, and so they gave him all his shots. And we moved a cot, his mother, a cot next to him to help him through his final stages. And now we know we can take a mouth swab, and we've made it and that it isn't the death sentence today that it once was. And during this 25 years, I've had a companion for 21 of them right here in Kimberly McCleary. And she's started something now that I want to call the New March of Dimes. She's executive director of the CFSAC Association. And she has a program where her emphasis is on research, and she has a program to say, well, where we have invented this procedure or this cure in this disease, let's run it against this one. And I say the March of Dimes because these are small amounts of money. We're not talking about but these are people who are really dedicated, and they're really determined that we're not going to sit around and wait. We're going to try something. Something is going to happen, and we're going to make a difference. I'm sorry that the chairman is not here today, because yesterday we all sat here so emotional when those little kids were describing having chronic fatigue syndrome and their struggle. And I can remember what the chairman said. He said, just because you have chronic fatigue syndrome now doesn't mean you're going to have it tomorrow. And I want personally to accept that to my own pledge for my daughter, my son-in-law, and other people that I love who have this miserable disease. And I'm going to spend whatever time I have to be sure that I can do every single thing that I can to bring hope and to bring enthusiasm. We are a considerable people. When we make up our mind to do something, we get it done somehow. But somehow we've gotten up into a tangle of this, that, and the other things, and confusion, and the enormous battle between all the diseases for public support. But I wanted to take this opportunity again to point out the miserableness of this disease in terms of the total number of Americans that get involved in it, with hundreds of thousands of people like me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Hillenbrand. The next speaker will be Ed Jelinski, and Tina Tidmore is going to read his testimony for him.
Thank you. I'm Tina Tidmore. I'm with the Communications Advisor, and Ed Jelinski, the Director and Senior Policy Advisor for Pandora, is had another commitment, so I'll be reading his testimony. It's 5 pages, so I will be directing you to the page where I am speaking. It will not be the whole thing. It will be a condensed version. First, Pandora wants to welcome the new voting members of the CFSAC. We're glad to see more people willing to dedicate time to make improvements for the patients. We look forward to seeing what experience, knowledge, and resources you bring to this distinguished committee. We also hope you will humbly learn about the disease from the veterans on this committee, its history, and the government's action and inaction on this disease. Especially, take note of the public testimony. You will find it enlightening and compelling. We take this opportunity to also welcome Dr. Susan Mayer as the new NIH ex officio and as the new person who oversees the NIH research on ME/CFS. You have big shoes to fill. Dr. Dennis Mangan was driven, open, and inclusive. He demonstrated to us that the DHHS can get things done. Our organization is optimistic on what you will bring to this committee. We acknowledge and we are pleased to see that the Special Emphasis Panel for CFS on the Center for Scientific Review at the NIH is now named correctly and is only for ME/CFS as directed by Congress. A lot of time has been wasted as the improper name affected its purpose, leading to grants that should have been for ME/CFS instead being used in research for other diseases. As Pat Firo with the Wisconsin ME/CFS Association reported to the committee last year, as much as $18.5 million of ME/CFS research grants went to studies that did not primarily study ME/CFS. How soon will you refund this money to true ME/CFS research? Page 2. Dr. Mayer, we would appreciate your finding an opportunity during the CFSAC meeting to answer these questions so all can hear. Pandora welcomes a meeting with you at any time and would like to continue our communication on these important issues. To the CDC, our next request is for Dr. Ermias Billet as the ex officio for the whole CDC as it relates to CFS. As you know, the Coalition for ME/CFS submitted a proposal to the National Center for Health Statistics Department of the CDC. Please note that this proposal was solely based on recommendations made by this committee as far back as 2004. The Coalition's proposal was to reclassify CFS in the ICD-10-CM and ICD-9-CM. We were pleased that the NCHS accepted the proposal for reviewing because the reclassification of CFS in the ICD-10-CM to the neurological chapter where myalgic encephalomyelitis is also located is a positive move. However, the NCHS presented their own option that contradicts what this committee of experts recommends. The NCHS procedure, as stated on their website, was for the decision on this proposal to be made before January 1st, 2012. Yet to date, no decision has been announced. We know the implementation of the ICD-10-CM has been delayed, but that has no bearing on the continued revisions of the ICD-10-CM, as they are still holding committee meetings and accepting proposals. Since last November, we have emailed them and left phone messages with no response. Just 10 days ago, Pandora sent a formal letter to the NCHS director. Do you know why the NCHS has not followed its own rules and announced a decision? If you do not, will you help us find out? We cannot let this issue be placed in limbo. And Dr. Unger, who isn't here, in 2011, we sent you a letter welcoming you to your new position and listed some actions we would like to see from the CDC. We're pleased to see that you have taken action on 5 of those points. However, there are 6 points that are still remaining, and we ask that you look at them. They're in the written testimony. Page 3. We are very concerned that the CDC website still treats CFS differently than other illnesses. On the page titled Improving Health and Quality of Life, the first topic is CBT. It says CBT has been successful in helping patients with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer, but CBT is not mentioned or recommended on the CDC website in information for those diseases. The recommendation to someone for diabetes, if needed, is for counseling to help the person cope with receiving that diagnosis. So
you have 1 minute.
Okay. As is true with any diagnosis, if an ME/CFS patient has comorbid depression and or anxiety, then CBT or other appropriate treatments should be recommended. However, the information listed under CBT in the CFS section of the CDC website is actually the type of guidance a person should receive from their physician or nurse. That is how to pace their activity and avoid exacerbating the illness. This is just like the lifestyle changes physicians give to someone with diabetes about exercise and diet. A diabetic does not get this information from CBT. It comes from a nurse or a physician. We have a mislabeling problem and a double standard. This should be corrected. We also note that the new CME video is now on Medscape, sponsored by the CDC. We feel the CME is an important improvement from what we've seen from the CDC in the past. However, we have great concerns over some of the content, especially at the end when the discussion turns to illness behavior or behaving like she should be ill or start trying to live up to the diagnosis. This false impression could be given in some of the statements that these patients display illness behavior because they want to remain on disability. What an awful and misleading message to give to physicians. How will they then treat the patient who does not...
I think you're out of time now.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And we did sign the letter, Mary Dimmick's letter, and we agree with
And we have your public testimony, or Mr. Jelinski's, will be on the public record.
Great, thank you.
Our next speaker will be via phone, and it is Samantha Hajj Williams.
Hello.
Yes, is this Samantha Hajj Williams?
This is. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, so you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hello, my name is Samantha Hajj Williams. Thank you, first of all, for video casting your meeting. Although you can't see me, I've been able to quietly watch the 2 days of presentations and discussions. I think probably along with hundreds of other homebound patients and caregivers and practitioners. And I wish you had a monitor on your end, because it would be a lot easier to use a webcam to communicate face-to-face, but I'll do my best over the phone. So first and foremost, I want to thank you. I want to thank this committee and the advocates for all of your hard work supporting scientific research and provider education on ME/CFS. This is my first time testifying. Back in 1997, when I was 21, I graduated summa cum laude from the Wharton School of Business, and I received the Dean's Award for Service to the Community. And then in the same year, I became suddenly ill and was diagnosed with ME/CFS. Prior to ME/CFS, I was a motivated student and hardworking volunteer. In middle school, I testified before the United States Senate in support of service learning programs. And in high school, I was invited for a live interview on Good Morning America about my volunteer work in nursing homes. And then at 21, I became so dramatically ill that my family flew me to the Mayo Clinic, where I was diagnosed with CFS after a week of diagnostic tests. The physicians explained that I was unlikely to ever be able to work or live alone. Since I was determined to prove them wrong, I refused to apply for disability, and I worked part-time against medical advice. Of course, within a few years, my ER visits became more frequent and my health deteriorated. It's now 15 years later, and I can't be at your meeting in person because I've been bedbound on a continuous IV saline drip in order to stay conscious for 6 weeks. Sometimes lying flat on the continuous saline isn't enough, and I still start to pass out, and we have to rapidly infuse 1 or 2 liters of the saline with the bag fully open before I'm able to regain consciousness. As you probably know, saline has been part of the standard protocol, thanks to Dr. Rowe, who I think spoke yesterday, since the mid-1990s. And yet, I have not met a single physician or a single nurse in any hospital who is familiar with ME/CFS and NMH treatment, except for 2 who themselves each had sons with this illness. Despite having all these personal records and instructions, I have been refused adequate rehydration and forcibly held upright whilst losing consciousness more than once in an ER. This is a common ME/CFS experience, as a nurse yesterday testified about a pregnant ME/CFS patient in Michigan. These life-threatening situations can be averted, which brings me to your discussion about the IA-CFS Physician's Primer. I encourage the CDC to provide a link to the primer in lieu of their current toolkit. The CDC toolkit really should be removed until it has been updated. I appreciate the CDC's recent website improvements, but the current toolkit could mislead physicians to treat very ill ME/CFS patients like myself with outdated, inappropriate, and harmful treatments. Yesterday, there was also some discussion about shortening or simplifying the primer, but I do think this is a bad idea. Although I don't have any medical training, I was able to understand the primer. Providers need at least this minimal information in order to diagnose and treat ME/CFS patients, especially the information about orthostatic intolerance and its treatment. I'd support this committee becoming the designated DHH experts on ME/CFS so that all the agencies first had to get this committee's approval before they posted the information to ensure that it was accurate. In closing, I've always naturally been very persevering and enthusiastic. But in truth, I am not sure how I will endure another 40 years of this degenerative illness. I have already been hospitalized for a week in the ICU for ME/CFS. I have watched my mother, a formerly athletic physical therapist and author, also become bedbound on IVs with the same condition. Last week, her core body temperature deregulated from 98 to 93 degrees in minutes. Her GI symptoms exacerbated, and her heart rate jumped from 80 to 150 upon standing. ME/CFS is clearly disabling and life-threatening. Without a breakthrough in research and treatment, I dread to think of the burden that I will become on my siblings and on the state as my illness continues to worsen. Since I couldn't be there with you in person, I've mailed your group a blanket of some of the saline bags that were used to keep me conscious while lying flat for the past 6 weeks. Since home care infusion isn't covered by Medicare, I paid around $1,900 out of pocket for this infusion, roughly 4 times my monthly disability payments. Hopefully, I won't need a lifetime of basic care, thanks to this committee's continued work on behalf of patients like myself. So thank you very, very much. That's all.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you.
Sure.
Okay, bye-bye.
Our next speaker is Matthew Fairman.
My name is Matthew Fairman. I never imagined before becoming sick. I'm sorry? I never imagined before becoming sick that an illness could so completely redefine my life. Instilled with the inspirational ideal of the disabled who rise above their limitations to achieve great heights, I imagined that disabilities were obstacles that could be overcome, at least to some degree. One only had to pull oneself together and rise above the obstacle. It was to my horror, then, to become sick with ME/CFS, an illness that I could not rise above, an illness that wrecks both body and mind, rendering victims living shells of their former physical and intellectual selves, and leaving them forever to languish on the margins of an unaware and uncaring society. No description can do justice to the experience of this illness. To those with only healthy points of reference, ME/CFS can only be described as feeling at all times like you have just finished running a marathon while extremely hungover and severely sick with the flu, after having not slept in at least 3 days. And even the slightest exertion, brushing teeth, showering, reading the newspaper, washing dishes, amplifies that feeling to even more unbearable levels, to the point where you can only lie on your back face up in a dark room to not feel worse. And the longer you are sick, the more ragged and worn out you feel. To state that ME/CFS is comparable to late-stage AIDS, congestive heart failure, and MS does not begin to convey the severity of this illness, the harsh, soul-crushing reality of an incurable illness that straitjackets the bodies and minds of its victims is lost in translation. For me, the change from vibrant life to pallid sickness was frighteningly abrupt. I graduated from Connecticut College Phi Beta Kappa and summa cum laude after winning awards in my final years for outstanding achievement and writing a 275-page honors thesis on the evolution of wartime repression in America. After college, I backpacked across Asia for 5 months, traveling alone for 2.5 months through an unstable part of Western China, India, and Southeast Asia. During that trip, I went scuba diving in Bali, climbed mountains in Tibet, rode a motorcycle through northern Thailand, found myself targeted by gem-smuggling scam artists in India, and once rode a train so packed that I was forced to stand for 17 hours of a 25-hour journey. I also met the wonderful woman who has become my wife. A life of joy and promise lay in front of me. Today, the sense of boundless opportunity is gone, replaced by never-ending sickness that totally dictates the boundaries of my life. Only 2 years later, I am unable to work, am largely housebound, and cannot read or write for more than a few minutes without developing headaches and becoming confused. I cannot sustain any significant physical or mental exertion without suffering a severe crash. On days when I crash, I am often so sick that I cannot even leave on the TV as the light and noise aggravate my symptoms. On those days, being too sick to do anything at all, I just lie in bed, lightheaded and zoned out. My head aching, my eyes burning like fire, my muscles sore and weak, and exhausted to a degree the healthy have never known, yet unable to sleep. My every experience of reality is mediated by pain and incomprehensible fatigue, from the moment of waking till the moment of sleep. My reality is a daily struggle, not just to overlook the harsh reality of physical suffering that never departs, or to come to grips with watching all my peers surpass me, while I grow physically weaker and my mind dulls, but to attempt to find meaning in a life that has been so severely circumscribed at such a young age. You must know that ME/CFS is one of the most severe illnesses in America today. This illness is not the yuppie flu, as popularly imagined, nor is it all in our head, as our uneducated medical community too often believes. Rather, it is a serious, life-robbing illness that is so torturous, so difficult to bear that some choose suicide to escape it. It is beyond travesty, then, that ME/CFS receives such an outrageously small sum of taxpayer funds for research, while other illnesses of similar severity and often smaller patient populations receive hundreds of millions and even billions of dollars for research. When this illness is one day solved, it will no doubt be obvious to all, as it is to the doctors, patients, and advocates here today, that those we trusted as stewards of the public health were too busy, too inattentive, too locked into erroneous, outmoded preconceptions to realize how vastly they were failing to meet the trust we put in them. More than any moment in the past, this moment is the time for change. The Norwegian government has already issued a formal apology for decades of neglect and utter disregard. It is time for the U.S. government to follow suit, to embrace this illness with the seriousness and vigor that characterized the fight against HIV/AIDS. For that to happen, public officials responsible for ME/CFS must take seriously the trust implicit in their position, for it is their moral responsibility to break down the doors that we sick patients cannot reach, to give form to the outrage we patients, doctors, and advocates feel by savagely working the message to Secretary Sebelius that this illness cannot be ignored any longer.
You have 1 minute.
I realize I'm over my time, but let me just say one last thing. The most frustrating thing about living with this illness is knowing that all this horrible suffering, the one thing that stands in our way, is the people here at the NIH, the FDA, and CDC who, in 30 years, have never taken this illness seriously. How many more of these meetings do we have to listen to civil servants pass the buck year after year after year? That's all I have to say.
Our next speaker is Joseph Lansen.
Hello, I'm Joe Lansen, and thank you for allowing me to address the CFSAC today. I'm testifying on behalf of my primate friend here, Sim I-An. Sim was lately employed in a research laboratory. He asked my help in relating his experience there because of the overlap with the ME/CFS patient experience. Having been placed in a 3-foot square cage, Sim was repeatedly chastised for not participating in graded exercise. That criticism did not sit well with him, no pun intended. Furthermore, Sim received a negative personnel review for failing to cooperate in talk therapy sessions. This is a real head-scratcher. Obviously, Sim doesn't talk, as evidenced by my testifying on his behalf today. Finally, Sim developed health issues as a result of his laboratory service. When he applied for disability benefits, the lab denied he had even worked there until he produced the only pay stubs he had available. After that, they mocked and minimized his condition and gave him a paltry settlement that barely acknowledged the degree of his disability. ME/CFS patients will recognize some of these experiences. While Sim is disappointed, he nonetheless feels his brief career was worthwhile, if only for his extensive study of human researchers, fascinating creatures that they are. On the one hand, they engage in highly complex language processing, talented manipulation of chemicals and tools, and intricate social interactions in pursuit of continued grant funding. On the other hand, what Sim thinks researchers have trouble doing is something that seems very simple. They can have trouble changing their minds. In other words, working daily with so much exacting detail, they can have problems developing a new concept or a new approach to the problem they're trying to solve. Throughout history, even when researchers do try to advance a new concept of a problem or an illness, they get treated much the way Sim was, with disdain. The history of ME/CFS and its previous incarnations seems to be a story of the same concepts and models, getting recycled over and over. It's hysteria, it's stress, it's infectious. Now we have some evidence that it's an autoimmune disease. But the evidence doesn't quite fit existing ideas of autoimmunity. Sim realizes how important it is to have statistically significant results from large aggregate data sets, but at the end of the day, isn't it more important to ask the right questions to frame the problem in the right way? Sim and I agree that many researchers are not yet asking the right questions about ME/CFS. While it's classified neurologically, it is mostly treated psychiatrically, while not really seeming at home in either space. What space does it belong in? Will finding or making that space make life easier for all us primates, be they bipedal like us or arboreal like Sim here? Maybe
You
if
have
we...
1 minute.
Thank you. Maybe if we get a unifying hypothesis of ME/CFS that makes sense, we can all be swimming in the same jungle, to borrow a phrase from Sim here, rather than so many different disciplines, each describing the illness in its own untranslatable way. Sim thinks the fractured research vision may be contributing to the underestimation, underfunding, and continued disdain for ME/CFS and its patients. Just a thought from a former lab primate. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you. Our last speaker for this session is Jennifer Spatilla, and she's calling in from the phone.
Hello?
Yes, Ms. Spatilla?
Yes.
Yes, this is Nancy Lane. Your brand minutes for public comment.
Thank you. I can't see the speakers table from the video cast, but I believe Court Johnson is representing me at the speakers table since I'm too ill to be with you in person today. I am not an invisible sufferer. Actions speak louder than words. Unfortunately, most of what we hear from the Department of Health and Human Services is words and empty promises. Despite all the effort you have invested in making recommendations to the Secretary, there's very little action to report. HHS updates the recommendations progress chart for this committee twice a year, and I assume that you examine each version closely. This chart is the only public metric for progress at HHS, and it is disappointing to say the least. In the last 20 months, only 3 of your recommendations have been marked with updated responses, and many of the recommendations marked complete have not actually been accomplished as you intended. I compared the progress charts dated October 2010, March 2011, and December 2011, which is the most recent version I have. Each chart was updated to add the new recommendations from your meetings, bringing the total number to 65. Apart from that, the progress reports were as follows. Regarding your recommendation that AHRQ's expected review of CFS for the State of the Knowledge meeting should be widely communicated, the March 2011 progress chart stated that NIH is in discussions with AHRQ regarding the review. But as you are aware, no AHRQ review was completed in time for the State of the Knowledge meeting or since. No progress there. Regarding your recommendation that several agencies collaborate on developing a demonstration project focused on more effective care for people with CFS, the March 2011 progress chart stated that additional knowledge of causes, care coordination, and treatment for CFS is needed before this can be undertaken. No progress there. Regarding your recommendation that HHS engage the expertise of the CFSAC to advance policy and agency responses to ME-CFS, the December 2011 progress chart stated that several members helped plan the SOK meeting and review the CDC website. It's better than nothing, I will admit, but I don't believe that meeting planning and website content review is where you can add the most value to the policy and agency responses to ME-CFS. That's it. 3 progress updates over a period of 20 months, and those updates were no, and ongoing. Furthermore, I direct your attention to items like your 2006 recommendation that NIH issue an RFA with specific funding attached. That recommendation is marked yes, complete, and the note states that 2 program announcements were issued in 2008. But we know that program announcements do not have dedicated funding attached, and no RFA has been issued by NIH in 6 years. Despite that significant discrepancy between your recommendation and what has been done, this is reported to you as accomplished. What are we to conclude from this? We always hear nice promises at these meetings. There's always the illusion that real progress is being made, that things are beginning to change. But to me, the lack of progress on your recommendations and the lack of accountability at HHS for ignoring your recommendations is the true barometer of where we are. Committee members, don't mistake these updates for real progress. To borrow from Dr. Grobstein's comments yesterday, keep track, keep asking. Actions speak louder than words. In our case, inaction speaks louder still. 14 months ago, Dr. Francis Collins announced that the Secretary had directed that CFS be given, quote, special attention, close quote. Is this what special attention looks like? Maybe it's just me, but I am not seeing much difference between the special attention we are allegedly receiving now and the lack of special attention we had before. I'm thrilled CDC is revising some of its materials, but that is not enough. Meeting with patient groups is not enough. I signed the joint letter from advocates and groups because HHS must undertake a strategic, coordinated, and fully funded effort to address the critical priorities for adequate ME-CFS research, treatment, and provider education. I call on HHS to put an end to this perpetuation of the status quo cloaked in words and promises. Do something real. Act on this committee's recommendations. We need answers. We
deserve action. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our public comment for this meeting, and I just want to thank all of the people who came forward and provided their comments both in person and on the phone, and for the people who helped those who could not speak by reading their testimony. It's always very important that we keep ourselves real here in this committee, and I appreciate your efforts. We're going to now have an hour, almost an hour off for lunch, and the committee will meet in subcommittees, and we will take you down to your rooms where those are. And we're going to meet back here promptly at 1:15, where we're going to have, I think, a new sort of presentation here with CFSAC, where we're going to hear from some of the many organizations that are out there working to improve the lot of people with CFSAC, with CFS, and with MECFS, and with their families.